Welcome, everybody. My name is Peter Chaurier, and I'm the KBA Assessment and Outreach Coordinator at WCS Canada. I'm running the KBA Canada monthly webinar series with our colleagues from Birds Canada and others at WCS Canada. And over the course of the next year-ish, we'll be discussing what KBAs, which of course the IBAs will be transitioning into, what these will mean for various parts of our broad conservation community in Canada. I'm speaking today from unceded Algonquin-Anishinaabe territory here in Ottawa, and it's a pretty rainy day today, but actually relatively warm, so I'm pretty excited to get outside, and I hope everybody else has a chance to enjoy the outdoors and a bit of nature today as well. As a couple of housekeeping items before we really get started, we'll be recording the talk today. We'll be cutting out the intro portion, but we'll be recording the talk today, and we'll be sending it to everybody who's RSVP'd on the Eventbrite, and it'll be also posted up on our KBA Canada website. If you'd like a copy, email me or anybody else attending today, and we'll be able to send that along to you as well. Just as a reminder, because we're recording, if you don't want to appear on the recording, don't turn on your video in the question and answer period. Otherwise, feel free to ask your questions at the very end. If you'd like, you can ask them yourself. And without further ado, I guess we'll get started. So today's webinar, I'm really excited for, and I think everybody else is as well. We have a bunch of really incredible speakers today, and we'll be talking about, this is the first of a two-part series where we'll be talking about how KBAs and the IBAs can foster conservation engagement among interested volunteers. So we'll be learning from a diversity of community-based conservation programs. Today we'll be talking about Birds Canada's IBA Caretaker program, and we'll be thinking about how the successes and the lessons that we've learned from these different programs, and hearing from a diversity of speakers on the ground and coordinating at a national level. So really looking forward to this. If you have questions throughout, we'll have a large question and answer period at the end of the talk today. So drop any questions you have throughout the presentations into the chat, and we'll ask them later, or we'll unmute everybody at the end of the talk, and you can ask them yourself at that point as well. On that note, I'm going to pass it over to Amanda Bichel, who is the Ontario Important Bird and Biodiversity Areas Coordinator. Amanda coordinates the Caretaker program, which we'll hear a lot more about over the course of today if you're not already familiar with it. Amanda has a background in environmental studies and biology and has worked with birds, bats, soil, and water, a really greatest hits list of biodiversity elements. And Amanda is a big part of the team at WCS Canada and Birds Canada and NatureServe Canada that is transitioning IBAs into KBAs and identifying KBAs across the country. So I'm very excited to hear from Amanda today, and I'll pass it over to her to share her screen and get going.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for introducing me. I will just share my screen here. Are you seeing it?
Looks good.
All right. Okay, so thanks for the introduction. Like Peter said, I'm the Ontario IBA Coordinator, but I do some national work as well with the IBA, the KBA transition. I'm very excited to be here today and hear from the other caretakers. Actually, that's the most exciting part. So I'll just jump right in. So a little quick outline. I'm going to share just a little bit about Birds Canada and the IBA program. I'm going to outline how the Caretaker Network model works, the successes and challenges from that program that we've learned, and how it could possibly be adapted or opportunities for the transition to KBAs. So I'm lucky enough to work out of this office. This is the Birds Canada headquarters in Port Rowan, right on the shores of Lake Erie. We're a non-for-profit, non-governmental charity, and our mission is to drive action to increase understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. So we have around 50 to 75 staff members, depending on the season, and we run 40 citizen science programs, including Christmas bird count, eBird, feeder watch, migration monitoring, and way more. And through these programs, we engage over 50,000 people across Canada. So there's really something for everyone at Birds Canada. There's beginner surveys like backyard bird count to advanced surveys like breeding bird surveys. So I'll start with a broad description of the IBA program. IBAs are a suite of sites designated for large groups of birds or species at risk, and our main goals are to try to identify those sites, monitor them for population trends, and conserve them when appropriate and possible. These sites are mainly coastal or interior wetland sites, with a few inland forests important for species at risk as well. There are more than 13,000 IBAs globally in almost every country, and there's been around 40 years of work done on the global IBA program. So Canada's 582 sites are shown on the map here. And all this to say that IBAs are kind of the foundation of the KBA program going forward in Canada and globally. So around 75% of the world's KBAs to date have been identified are actually previous IBAs, so that have been transitioned over to this new kind of all-encompassing program. A few IBA stats for you. So around 200 IBAs have overlapping protection from national and provincial parks, wildlife areas, nature reserves, and other forms of managed or protected areas. However, you can see from the pie chart that most only have a small overlap of protection. So there's around 20 years and $1 million have been invested in the IBA program through grants from governments and private funders and more. And then also further, in an analysis that we did in around 2016 shown here, it revealed, not surprisingly, that most IBAs have overlap with hundreds of federally listed taxa, confirming what we already knew, which is that IBAs are good for all species, not just birds. So let's jump into the Caretaker Network. So first, what is a caretaker? There's Cheryl and Peter. Unfortunately, Peter couldn't join us today, but Cheryl will be speaking with you today. So a caretaker is a local volunteer who cares about an IBA or more than one IBA and has knowledge about the habitat, political atmosphere, many other things that we couldn't know on the ground without them. So they're community champions and leaders who want to act as stewards to ensure that changes within IBAs or threats to their ecological integrity are properly documented and ideally resolved. So the network is made up of all of the caretakers and the volunteers that they recruit who do all of this amazing work. A bit of a timeline. In 2006, a pilot caretaker network was launched in BC. In 2007, after a successful year, there were funds that made it possible to roll it out as a national program, as a way to kind of revive the IBA program. It was happening in the rest of the world, so the push was made nationally. In 2009, along with an IBA master plan for the following 5 years, caretaker meetings across Canada brought together caretakers so that they could discuss progress, challenges, and ideas. By 2012, Ontario, Manitoba, and the Atlantic region had signed on to the caretaker program. And then in 2015, Ontario had a similar caretaker meeting. So the caretaker model is the same across Canada in each province, but each province kind of puts their own spin on it. Manitoba, for example, has their very own website for IBAs, and many of the provinces have their own newsletters that go out provincially. So the national leads in Canada are Birds Canada and Nature Canada for technical and logistical parts of the IBA program, but it's really the regional partners or the IBA coordinators that help implement the program on the ground. A few of the provincial IBA coordinators are from Birds Canada, so me for Ontario, for example, and the rest are from the nature organization for that province, like Nature NB for New Brunswick, for example. So they're responsible for organizing local conservation efforts, advocacy, monitoring, and planning, relaying information back to us at the national level, recruiting and coordinating caretakers, and supplying caretakers and volunteers with resources and advice when they need it. So then there are the caretakers themselves, and we really couldn't do anything without them. So there are local eyes and ears, so to speak, and some caretaker responsibilities are to visit and monitor their IBA when trigger species are present, organize and carry out conservation activities, report back to their IBA coordinator, and share stories and experiences with others. So this map just shows the distribution of approximately 300 sites with active caretakers at them across Canada. And then this just gives you a better idea of the coverage across Canada. So as you can see, BC, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia have the most coverage. And there's still a lot of work to be done in the 3 territories and Newfoundland and Labrador, as you can see. So some program successes that we've had are that there are many resources for caretakers on our maintained website, including site summaries that caretakers help to keep update, maps, data which caretakers help to collect, and other resources like the eBird IBA protocol and the caretaker manual. So far, we have around 300 sites that have caretakers assigned to them. So of course, how active they are varies across sites, but caretakers and volunteer monitoring plus eBird observations make it so that 67% of IBAs are adequately monitored by around 6,200 people across Canada. We've had some specific funding that we've helped distribute for caretaker engagement at priority IBAs called the Local Action Fund. And we've had success with a few policies based around IBAs, like our Birds Canada wind energy policy, which recommends no wind turbines be placed in important bird and biodiversity areas. Some of the specific conservation actions we have had success with have reached a variety of groups. So monitoring reaches mainly birders and naturalist clubs, and targeted surveys are done in at least 116 IBAs using the IBA protocol that I had mentioned. And this tool and the monitoring itself is great to collect data, but also for outreach to new people. Families and new birders are engaged through education, events, and hikes like community bio blitzes at Tiny Marsh IBA and hikes at the Dundas Valley IBA. We put up signage, as you can see here, at many IBAs, as well as try to raise awareness of people walking on the trails. There's been a few restoration projects, like pulling invasive species at the Sandy Bar IBA in Manitoba, which is seen here. We've done some advocacy work as well, but I'll let the caretakers talk more about that. And some of it has resulted in protection of land and IBAs. On our most recent project is having regional coordinators and caretakers review sites to find extra data or to make sure that boundaries are still accurate at their IBA or other IBAs that they're familiar with for the transition of IBAs to KBAs that we're working on at Birds Canada. So a few challenges that we've had with the program are that national and even provincial coordination is particularly challenging to fund because a lot of funding for on-the-ground actions are location-based. It's hard to get funding for multiple IBAs at once or funding for general caretaker outreach. On top of that, most of our regional coordinators are not solely focused on IBAs, so finding the time for them is really tough when they have to spend time on so many other projects and programs that they run. Sometimes we find that the program relies on opportunistic funding. So this sometimes means that urban places with more funding available have more actions in them, like Hamilton and Niagara. Since IBAs are based on birds alone, it's sometimes hard to engage people outside of the birding world, even though we definitely encourage people, and they don't have to be experts, but that's kind of how it's perceived sometimes, I think. So this leads to only like a certain part of the birding community being really involved in and understanding the IBA program. So youth in the naturalist community, even novice birders, are mostly unaware of IBAs. Another challenge is that it's a huge effort to protect a place, and caretaker groups don't always have the resources or capacity for that. There are ways around it, as I'm sure you will hear about, but it is a challenge. And then one more challenge is finding caretakers for more remote sites in Canada that in turn don't get monitored. But I guess this is kind of just the nature of Canada in itself. I'm excited to hear from, I won't say anything here, but excited to hear from Anne-Marie, who is the caretaker for Fraser River Estuary, and Cheryl Anderson, who is going to speak to you as well. We'll skip past those ones. So this is my last slide. As we move forward, we realize there's so many new opportunities for Birds Canada and conservation as a whole with this program, but also for our caretaker groups. So it's been great working with our new-ish Birds Canada partners, WCS and NatureServe Canada. So we hope that caretakers can kind of benefit from those connections as well, and make their own connections through the KBA context. So the KBA program is also a chance to get buy-in from all conservation organizations. So IBAs are based on birds, but now we'll be representing all of these elements of nature. So it immediately gains a broader buy-in from all conservation organizations. And we already kind of have those links, but this will just make the link stronger and more clear. We can reach out to a broader naturalist audience as well to be involved in this program. So work has already started with bio blitzes and things like that, but again, this makes the connections a lot stronger. With new knowledge and tools, we can make more targeted conservation decisions nationally, but also make decisions with caretaker groups about what is defined as a priority area and site for them. And then we can leverage different types of funding depending on the KBA and the species triggers and the appropriate need there. We can also start to broaden our activities and try new things, like being more active in informing businesses and decision-making about development, for example, in local spots. So I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of other ideas from the two caretakers that speak, and when we have a discussion at the end, but those are some of the opportunities that I see. So thank you for having me, Peter, and collaborating, and thank you everyone for listening. I'm excited to see the rest of the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. That was a terrific presentation, and really sets us up really well to hear from the next couple of speakers as well. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
If you have questions, oh, sorry, yeah, thank you. If you have questions from Amanda, those in the audience, type them into the chat or hold on to them and ask them at the end of the rest of the talks as well. But do feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll ask them later as well. On that, I'll introduce our next speaker. I'm really happy to welcome Cheryl Anderson here from the Prince Edward County South Shore IBA. This is an IBA that's a terrific example of local conservation engagement and of really fostering that and having an active kind of program around that. So really happy to welcome Cheryl. She's the Vice President of the South Shore Joint Initiative, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that in just a moment. So Cheryl, let me share my screen. Let me know whenever you'd like to advance the slides, and we'll take it away.
Okay, nice to be here. Thanks so much, Peter. Just a little bit about Prince Edward Point Bird Observatory before we move forward. Prince Edward Point Bird Observatory is a self-funded charity run totally by volunteers. We're a member of the Canadian Migration Monitoring Network, and we do migration monitoring in the spring and fall. And this summer, we started a MAPS program in the summer that's monitoring avian productivity and survivorship. So we're almost operating all year now. Okay, my next slide should come up now, I think. Okay, here we are. Just so you can see, our IBA encompasses the far south shore of Prince Edward County, and Prince Edward County drops down into Lake Ontario. So we're kind of a funnel there for birds on migration coming in the fall, and we're sort of a first stop for birds crossing Lake Ontario in the spring. Our IBA has 26 square kilometers of land and 65 square kilometers of nearshore water, so a lot more water than land. And the reason for that will come up in the next slide. Okay, it won't, it'll come up a little later. The IBA was established in 2000, and a little bit about the South Shore. It was first settled in the late 18th century, but Europeans and also Indigenous peoples used it as a hunting and fishing area all the way along. It was a pine and oak forested covered area. It didn't look anything like this. Once the Europeans arrived, they harvested the pine and the oak to build sailing ships and for the masts of those sailing ships, and all of that wood was kind of shipped across the Atlantic Ocean to the UK. So the soils are very shallow, and of course fine for those species, but since then really this land has not been good for agriculture, in spite of the fact that that's what the Europeans were trying to do there. And so it's just succession at this point, most of it. It was used for military training in the mid-20th century after the Second World War. The whole area was used for military training. However, in the 60s and 70s, the Kingston field naturalists started bird banding at Prince Edward Point. And it became very clear that what we know now, that our area was a very important stopover point for birds. And so the success of that bird banding program led to the establishment of the Prince Edward Point National Wildlife Area, where Petbo is now located. So next slide. Here is why we are an IBA and why all that water is important. Our area is globally significant for congregatory species. So we have regularly up to 7% of the global population of long-tailed ducks in the winter. This is for long-tailed ducks, and for greater scaup and white-winged scoters, this is their winter refuge. So we have vast rafts of ducks, and they've already started off the South Shore now. We see up to 5% of the global population of greater scaup and up to 1.5% of the global population of white-winged scoters in the winter. Let's carry on. So also, we see many species at risk. Now, I've got a long list here of species at risk that have been documented using the IBA as a stopover site, mostly, but also we have significant species at risk that breed in our area. So, for example, now bald eagle is now breeding in the area. The whippoorwills breed in the area, so do barn swallows, and bobolinks kind of around the edge, which is something else that we're going to talk about a little bit later, eastern meadowlark, and black tern, least bittern. So yes, we have quite a few species at risk that do breed in our IBA going on. But it's not just about species at risk. I see some of this, some of my slide isn't really showing up, probably just because it's being sent from your computer, Peter, but that's okay. What I wanted to say was our IBA isn't important just for species at risk or just for congregatory species. It's also very important for amphibians, fish, for insects. We have one of the 3 international monarch reserves at Prince Edward Point. We also have identified the presence of butternut tree in our area. And the one thing that we've got almost every kind of turtle in our area. And Also, very significant alvar geography, because the alvar areas are mostly all around the Great Lakes, and of course we're right in one Great Lake. So things that have become very important are the presence and the breeding of Blanding's turtle in our IBA, and also monarch butterflies. Next one. So how did PEPO get involved in the IBA program? In 2013, there was an attempt to do a turbine project in the Ostrander Point Crown Land Block, which is within our IBA. PEPO was part of the group of organizations that fought that turbine project, led by the Prince Edward County Field Naturalists. We were successful in that fight, and we did block that turbine project. However, what that brought home to us was that we really needed to find a way to collect more data and to have that data available should we have to go into this type of a fight again. And at the same time, the IBA program was ramping up in Ontario, and that looked like to us like a really good thing for PEPO to get involved with. Next slide. So we're going on to Peter's section now, and so I'm just going to tell you what Peter has written. So the IBA is made up of a patchwork of public and private lands with different levels of protection from different jurisdictions. So here on the, I don't know if does this show up? The National Wildlife Area is on the far right in the darker green. There's some Ducks Unlimited area there. There is Quinte Conservation Area, Little Bluff Conservation Area. Nature Conservancy of Canada owns 2 pieces of land. One is the Hudge and Rose Nature Reserve, and then the other side of the Ostrander Point Crown Land Block is the Maple Cross Coastline Reserve. And then the Hastings Prince Edward Land Trust has the Miller Family Nature Reserve. So the 2 brown pieces here are the Point Peter Provincial Wildlife Area and the Ostrander Point Crown Land Block. Both of those are public pieces of land. However, they do not enjoy any protection at this point. Next slide. So in spite of the fact that that those 2 pieces of land don't enjoy any protection, and most of the other pieces of land, most of the rest of the IBA is private, we have been able to run a variety of monitoring events that have been set up on the IBA. So we do waterfowl counts, and those are identified on the top there by those blue stars, some of the areas where we do waterfowl counts. That's both in the spring and in the fall. The black dots are our whippoorwill surveys that we do usually at the time of the full moon in June. And then there's all those yellow and pink dots that are point counts all the way through the IBA. And then on the bottom map, you can see areas that we do observations on, regular, every season observations. It takes a lot of volunteer effort to do this. People sort of take charge of their section and regularly do their surveys. most of these we're able to get down to all these areas without going on to private property. So these are areas that we can get to through trails or roads, so that we're not really going somewhere we shouldn't be going. Next slide, please. So how do we manage all of this? Well, we've recruited from PEPBO members. We send out e-blasts and newsletters. We put it on social media and we advertise in order to get volunteers to do these types of activities. So Peter has here in 2017, we had 45 volunteers for 400 hours. In 2020, our number of volunteers and our number of hours went down, maybe because of COVID, maybe because people just got tired. We're not really sure. However, we're working actively with the Prince Edward County Field Naturalists, with Nature Conservancy Canada, because we are allowed to go onto their properties, and with Hastings Prince Edward Land Trust, with Nature Canada and the Gosling Foundation, and also with the South Shore Joint Initiative. And I'll explain more about that a little later. Next slide. We continue to do the migration banding at the point. The Prince Edward County Field Naturalists have annual bio blitzes. Even during COVID, we've been able to have kind of self-directed bio blitzes. And during the past year, the field naturalists have had what we call a biothon. So on the Maple Cross Coastal Reserve, we've been going once a month and making observations of not only birds, but plants and insects and everything else that we can see. So it's sort of an ongoing bio blitz. We are continuing the spring and fall waterfowl counts and the whippoorwill survey. And during the Spring Birding Festival, the PEPBO Spring Birding Festival, we have special counts and surveys that we do. We do 2 Christmas bird counts in the IBA. One is more or less on the eastern side in Prince Edward Point, and the other one is part of the Sandbanks count. And so we take part in that. We continue our block monitoring. eBird has made it so much easier to collect data. And so everybody who's going into the IBA to bird is putting it on eBird, so that makes it much, much easier for us to collect data. We did do a special project on bobolink banding at the Miller Family Nature Reserve for 2 years. We had a SAR grant for that. And the bobolink banding project actually continues at PEPBO, where they've been doing it there for about 10 years. So all of that data now is, we have a 4th year student at Trent who will be writing a paper on all of that data, including the Miller Family Nature Reserve data and the bobolink data from PEPBO. And we've had workshops to teach people a little bit more about how to identify warblers, that sort of thing. Okay. And so here's some of the things that we've found. We have lots of whippoorwills, and I have to tell you, one of my best things last summer when I was doing my bird count, my Great Canadian Bird Count, we were in one spot and we had whippoorwills, a chuck-will's widow, and American woodcock all calling at the same time. Just really, that was just great. So, and Peter and I have done breeding studies of least bittern in the Lighthall Marsh. And that means that we get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and take our kayaks to the marsh and put it in. It's quite a bit of fun. We have a new volunteer called Paul Jones, and he has been monitoring one of our places at Charwell Point almost daily for the past year and a half. And we are getting so much more data about shorebird stopover there. It's something that we didn't expect, and it's really, really great to know. So, and we do know that we have staging areas for waterfowl, bobolink, winter birds, and breeding evidence, all of those things that I've been telling you about all the way along. So we can go on. Peter has been writing reports. Now he's gone to Manitoba. I don't think he will write reports for us anymore, and we will continue that. Our annual reports to the PEPO board and to Birds Canada describing the events. And the Violet Blitz reports are written by Peckfen, the field naturalist. And we have 7 years of those BioBlitz reports. And as I explained, that we will be getting a paper on the bobolink banding from our students. So carrying on. So about 2018, we came together with many organizations. That's the Bird Observatory, the Field Naturalists, Kingston Field Naturalists, Quinte Field Naturalists, the Alliance to Protect Prince Edward County, Birds Canada, Nature Canada, Ontario Nature, the Gosling Foundation, and the Consicon Foundation. We all came together because we wanted to work on getting protection for areas of the IBA. And we knew that that wasn't something that PEPO could do by itself. So we needed to gather together more organizations. So the purpose of the South Shore Joint Initiative is to advocate for the designation of the public lands as a conservation reserve. That is those 2 pieces of lands, the Ostrander Point Crown Land Block and the Point Peter Provincial Wildlife Area. We have been pretty successful. It hasn't happened yet. However, the Government of Ontario, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, is working towards that. The biological data has been gathered. We're hoping that this intention will go on to the ERO, which is the way that people can comment. And we're hoping to get a designation in 2022. We are also advocating for the establishment of a National Marine Conservation Area in Eastern Lake Ontario, and that is all of those lands, all of those waters that are around the land part of the IBA. And part of our hope is that more people will understand the rich cultural history that exists in the South Shore. We are doing all of this by engaging the people of Prince Edward County to secure responsible use and management of our public lands. We're doing that through social media, South Shore strolls, where we invite people to come and see a certain area of the IBA. And we have webinars, a newsletter, and part of what we're doing is hoping that we can have our IBA/KBA expanded, because we know that Blanding's turtle and bobolinks are using the areas to the north of the IBA. And thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you so much, Cheryl.
a little bit of thank you so much. And thank you also for filling in for Peter Fuller, who couldn't be here as well. Very exciting. I hope I can join in for one of these South Shore strolls sometime. And before we answer questions to Cheryl, let's pass it over to our last speaker. Very excited to welcome Anne Murray here on the other side of the country in BC. Anne is the IBA caretaker for the Fraser River Estuary, Boundary Bay, Roberts Bank-Sturgeon Bank IBA. A long name, and I think for a reason, because it's an incredibly beautiful place. So let me pass it over to Anne to take it away for the last presentation of today.
Right, thank you. Yes, can everybody hear me?
Sounds good, yeah.
Good. Yeah, so this picture here, which we're starting off with, I don't know how good you are at counting birds, but we estimated this flock and had it, and tried confirming that a couple of ways, expert opinion and some mathematics, and there's 20,000 snow geese there. And that's just one flock of the very many snow geese that are passing through in fall. Some stay for the winter, but most pass through in fall and then come back again in the spring. So, and this photograph was taken just quite recently at Roberts Bank, which is a very important site in the Fraser Estuary. I'm really glad that Prince Edward Island is doing so much with the Caretaker Network. I have to say, I was actually the originator of the Caretaker program. I'll just mention how that came about and then talk a little bit about some of the things we're doing. But I'm not going to talk at length on the details. So back in 1996, the idea of having important bird areas recognized and designated came to Canada. And I remember attending a large number of meetings just as an interested bird watcher and naturalist. And over the course of the next few years, the IBA program was rolled out. And all the sites were designated, and then nothing sort of seemed to happen. So what Peter Davidson, who I can't quite remember whether he worked for Birds Canada then, I think he did still, or back then, and I discussed was what we could do with the program, and came up with the idea of a caretaker program, which was really just to ensure that we knew somebody who knew the site that was on the map, because an awful lot of the sites in BC were very remote, out on the west coast or up in the islands, up in Haida Gwaii, and we really had difficulty even sort of knowing where they were and anything about them. So we tried linking the sites with people. And from there it grew into a much more of a proactive program for a lot of people. And so basically the caretaker program, which was meant to just be somebody who knows about the site, turned into this amazing force for protection, education, mapping, and so on. You can go to the next picture. Are you in charge of that, Peter? Can you do it? Yeah. So, of course, the Fraser River Estuary is designated under so many programs. It's internationally important, and not only is it an important bird area, but it's a global hemispheric site. There's a whole string of different things about it. So one of the first things we thought we must do is put up signs to explain this. So we got funding and we started putting up signs. Now, this sort of sign is very expensive to do. It cost $800 or something, and that doesn't count the stand, which was put up by the local park. But this sort of information is absolutely vital in letting the public know what it is they're looking at. And information like this, along with the IBA signs, put around various places, and a whole bunch of other work that the caretakers have done, has really helped change the public impression of the area. At one time, I remember speaking to the old Delta Council back in, the 2000s, and the council member said to me, Boundary Bay, all there is there is a bunch of seagulls. And, we're the most important bird area for the number of species of waterfowl, shorebirds, etc. here in Canada. So it has made a big turnaround. So one of the things I did right from the start of it was I assisted in hiring IBA coordinators. I'd like to recognize the past coordinators since 2000, Barry Booth, Krista England, James Bradley briefly, who's known to some of you, Krista Captain, who'll be familiar to you, and now Liam Reagan is our fifth caretaker coordinator and IBA coordinator, and they've all done absolutely a marvelous job in expanding some of the different aspects of the program. I worked with the coordinator and we set up a technical committee of experts who could help work on boundaries, conservation issues, bird counts, regular reports to the BC Nature membership through the quarterly magazine. We have an article in every issue of the magazine ever since 2000. External communications, so doing media work and so on, putting up IBA signs like this one, fundraising to do things, site visits, taking people around from when they came from other places, and now the IBA to KBA transition. And I've done that in my role as the volunteer liaison to BC Nature. I've now stepped down from that role. I'm been very focused this last year on the Fraser River Estuary, of which I'm one of the caretakers. The other two are Margaret Cuthbert and Mary Tate. And we've just roped in Yusuf Adia as number 4, because Sturgeon Bank, which is a vital part of the estuary, was kind of getting overlooked. Can we have the next slide, please? Probably everybody's ready for another picture. So here's some of the snow geese up close, because I know you couldn't see them very well there. These snow geese are feeding on grass at Alaxon, I believe, which is a national wildlife area. We've got a national wildlife area, we've got provincial wildlife management areas, we've got the Burns Bog, which is a sort of co-managed area and mostly close to the public in the center of the estuary. And then we've got city parks as well. So we've got a lot of different jurisdictions. One of the exciting things when dealing with jurisdictions is the dike itself. The whole area of the estuary is diked. And as you're walking along the dike, you're on a piece of property that's owned by Metro Vancouver in a number of places in Delta. That's Metro Vancouver. Step off the dike and you're in Delta property on one side and provincial property on the other side. Now, when you want something done like the management of invasive species or protection of owls, you're then dealing with multi-jurisdictions and their staff members. So it can get quite involved. Next slide, please. So as one of the caretakers, I participated in regular surveys. One of the ones I used to do with my husband was the beach bird surveys through the winter. Here's a winter shot in the top right. So counting birds is one of the things that one group of people do. They actually do a count, monthly count. But we chose to do the dead bird survey, which doesn't sound very nice, but you walk along the beach and you find beached birds, which is the polite way of saying they're dead, and you pick them up and you see, you can send them in for a cause of death and whatever. And the Boundary Bay area had the highest rate of beached birds of all of BC, so it kept us busy. The worst experience for that was the time we spotted in the distance what looked like a human body. It was pale and it was large and it was lying on the beach. But luckily, as we got closer, it turned out to be one of the swans that you see below, the great, enormous trumpeter swan, lying on its back with its stretched out. So sad as we were to see it was a dead swan, which was an unusual find, in fact, it was better than a dead human body in the circumstances. The poor swan had hit a power line. So this was a dramatic thing that we were then able to take to BC Hydro and say, look, your power lines strung here have caused the death of an endangered trumpeter swan. And so BC Hydro, being good folks, put up markers on their power lines so that the birds could see them and avoid hitting them. And they've done that in a number of places. We've also lost herons that way and so on. And they've tried to modify their power lines so that they cause fewer bird kills. So, you can work with agencies, you can work with governments to affect change. The poor chilly birds on the right there are dunlin. We have huge numbers of dunlin stay the winter as well as migrating through. They're one of the important birds that create the bird, IBA. Next slide, please. So another thing I have done is worked with Mary Tate on conservation issues. Mary has been absolutely an inspiration in driving the charge to protect Boundary Bay, Roberts Bank, which is still under huge threat from a port development, and Sturgeon Bank. And we were instrumental in getting wildlife management areas declared quite a few decades ago now. And also protecting the agricultural land reserve around the bay and in the estuary. The agricultural land reserve is a provincial designation that means that farmland stays as farmland, but at one point it was rapidly being converted to housing, golf courses, and so on. And there was a huge battle, I would say, over this back in the, I guess it must have been in the 80s or 90s. The 90s, I think, 1990s. So working with Mary Tate on that, and with Mark Cuthbert on the Boundary Bay Atlas, the White Rock Museum exhibit, and recently on the Boundary Bay Birding Trail map. Mark Cuthbert and David Riley, her husband, have been absolutely a huge force on the eastern side of the bay, where Boundary Bay turns into Semiahmoo Bay. It's all part of the IBA. And now the KBA, of course. And they have done a huge amount of work, both in Semiahmoo Bay and in the area of the Nikomekel Serpentine and especially the Little Campbell River that flows into Semiahmoo Bay. So we've all taken different aspects of the caretaker role, I would say, but also work together, which has been terrific. I've been working a lot with Delta Naturalists in recent years with members of the Delta Naturalist Society. We led a successful request in 2015 to the municipality of Delta that they would enact a birds and biodiversity conservation strategy. And they heard our presentation, got staff to work on that. And in 2018, that strategy was enacted. And so now we, the naturalists, are following up to work cooperatively with city staff to achieve goals and objectives of the strategy, including working on education activities and access and recreation issues. This is Mount Baker, by the way, in the background of this slide, if you're wondering. And that's in the state of Washington. Of course, they've got some IBAs just on the other side of the border. Next slide, please. The estuary is a site of hemispheric importance, Western Hemispheric Shorebird Reserve Network. That's just another one of the signs that was put up to recognize that. Next slide, please. And it attracts bird watchers from all over the world. One of the very important species that we have coming through in spring and fall are the western sandpipers. And I was watching a flock of these one time, at Rifle Refuge, which of course is the preeminent site in the Delta for birds, one of the absolutely top bird watching spots in the whole of Canada. And I was shocked to see a curlew sandpiper flying with the flock. And it was a little bit funny because it was the one time I've ever been at Rifle and there was absolutely nobody else in sight. I'm not a photographer. I don't carry a camera most of the time. And I certainly didn't have one with a long enough lens to catch moving curlew sandpipers in flight. Anyway, I was standing there thinking, what on earth am I going to do? Because I'm going to need a photograph to prove this is a rare curlew sandpiper from the other side of the Pacific. And along came some of the Taiwanese birding club members who I knew a little, and I got chatting with them. And anyway, we were sort of delighted to see each other. And then I remembered to point out to, oh, well, you must see this bird because I need a photograph. And Devon Yu, a young photographer, just swung his camera around and got this fantastic photograph of it in flight. So I was very happy that day. And it was something that I'm wanting to work with more in the coming months and years is the multicultural aspect of bird watching. You know, welcoming new Canadians, Canadians with other languages, folks that haven't been involved so much in conservation issues and so on, and sort of broadening the spectrum of people that we get interested in birds and nature in general. And I think the KBA program is going to be a great time to start that wider outreach. Next slide, please. Just a few more of shorebirds, some of the diversity, dunlin and black-bellied plovers, very common in winter. Next slide, please. And we have raptors. These also are IBA specific birds, the listed birds. So the bald eagle numbers here in winter are absolutely through the roof. They've rarely recovered from poisoning episodes earlier on. And we have owls, which are a key species here, a number of different owls. And we're currently working, our Delta Naturalist Society group are currently working on a brochure addressing the harassment of owls, just trying to tell people what correct behavior around owls is. It's a big problem with photographers here. Next slide, please. And we have marshes on the riverside of the, this is the Fraser River marshes, which as they come through the delta, the river bifurcates into several arms, and these back marshes are fantastic habitats. This is where I did the full IBA count, my portion of it. Lennon, my husband, and I did it with a member of the Delta Nats on Saturday, Sunday, whatever day it was, and it's a really good area. There's also a large population of the Fanini subspecies of great blue heron in this area. Next slide. Okay, this is the last slide, and I wanted to sort of rush through to this because up the top left there, you can see these are the brochures that our Delta Naturalist Club have been working on in this last year and a half. There are lockdown brochures. Now, the two on the right, we already had, the Birds in Delta and Experience Delta, Birding in Delta, and we've distributed tens of thousands of those brochures with the help of Delta Municipality, paying for a lot of printing and so on. The other brochures are animals in Delta, bugs in Delta, butterflies and moths, damselflies and dragonflies, flowering plants, intertidal life, and we have two more to come, one on trees and shrubs and woodland plants in Delta, and one on fungi. And these brochures have been produced with the help of sponsors like the Pacific Parklands Foundation, the BC Nature Foundation, and Delta Municipality itself, and with input from freely given by many experts around BC. And our little group of 5 or 6 people have put these together just in the last year. So we've been working very, very hard on this. And we're grateful for our sponsors and for the enthusiasm with which these brochures have been met. So we're going to be doing a BioBlitz very soon, and this will help do it. So we're seeing this as the stage of moving towards the KBA program by just getting the information out there into the hands of regular people. The 2 pictures on the right, bottom right, are the 2 books I've written on the Fraser River Estuary. In case you're interested, you can find them online. And the Georgia Basin Habitat Atlas is the one Mark Cuthbert and David Riley and myself and various other people worked on. That was Mark Cuthbert's direction and initiative. So anyway, very hasty of sort of some of the things we've done in the hopes of inspiring others, and yeah, just been a really enjoyable project to work on for the last, how many years is that now? Over 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne, for a third in a series of terrific presentations today. Thank you so much. To everybody watching, if you have to head out on the hour, no worries. Remember, we're recording the talk, so everyone who's subscribed to the Eventbrite will get a copy of that recording, and feel free to email me as well if you'd like to make sure you get a link. But I think if the speakers are all right with it, then we'll stick around for a couple minutes, maybe 10 minutes, to answer some questions still here today while we have everyone. So feel free to stick around for that. But thank you again to all the speakers, to Amanda, to Cheryl, to Anne. Thank you in spirit to Peter, who couldn't be here but was willing to present as well. Some great presentations. We'll move on to the question period now, but before we do, I just want to mention that we'll have part 2 of this topic in a couple of weeks, where we'll talk about conservation efforts, local conservation efforts going on outside of birds that are not related to IBAs. So if you're interested in the topic and you want to hear more about what's going on unrelated to IBAs, but that could be incorporated into the KBA program still, stay tuned for that. But some great questions in the chat already. So I think we'll move on to those. And thanks to everybody who's been interacting there. Scrolling all the way up, and we'll ask the first question here from Liv. How do organizations?
Peter, sorry, I've kind of answered all the questions.
Okay, perfect.
In the chat, and so I wouldn't want you to read all of the messages out loud. But one of the questions I'm curious about, if Cheryl has any input, is from Rachel. Oh, where did it go? Are the data publicly available? I kind of answered that because the IBA and the KBA data will be publicly available, like on a new website, and our IBA data is always available on the IBA website for birds, but I'm not sure about other species. If she was
all of the PEPO data is available. I think it has to be through Nature Counts, but she's in the county. She said she was on the Environmental Advisory Committee. There's no problem for the EAC getting data, and certainly it's just a matter of asking. As far as I know, they don't have any problem getting data, and it's maybe just the fact that she hasn't been the person writing the reports. Certainly, I mean, eBird is very easy to access, and iNaturalist the same way too, so easy to get data that way. And if they need special data from PEPO, just a matter of asking. But there's several other people on that committee that would know that too, I think. I will reach out to her.
She said she would email you.
Pardon me?
She said she would email you.
Okay, good. Good.
Yes, we've been advising people to use iNaturalist on the brochures for the non-bird species, and we use eBird for all the bird species. We eBird all our walks and trips.
Yeah, both very good resources for both inputting data and learning.
Yes.
Well, thank you for answering the rest of those questions in there, Amanda, as well.
I don't think there are any more.
Yeah, I think on that case, given we're already a little past time, thank you everybody for sticking around. Thank you to everybody who presented today, and thanks everyone for joining as well. If there are any burning questions or questions you realize later this evening that you didn't get the chance to ask, I'm sure you'll be able to contact some of these speakers today. Feel free to email me, and I can put you in contact as well. And stay tuned for the recording of the talk coming up in the next few days, and for the announcement of the next part of the series, which will be in a couple of weeks. Thank you again to everybody, and have a great day. Make sure you get outside and enjoy an IBA or KBA near you.
Yeah. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.